Hi, I am Drew, and I'll be your guide to the upstairs rooms of Rose Hill Manor. If you have any questions, please ask the person at the front desk or the tour guide when they meet up with you. This room is set up to represent an office that Governor Thomas Johnson would have used. We at Rose Hill do not know how the upstairs rooms were used, but we do know of a letter in which Governor Johnson described his view from the chamber window. He could see the gardens, the orchards, and the mountains. When the distant trees on the horizon are bare, you can see the Catoctin Mountains, a part of the Blue Ridge mountain range. It can be assumed that Governor Johnson resided in this room or the one across the hallway. John Adams remembers Thomas Johnson by this quote: "If it had not been for such men as Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Chase, and Thomas Johnson, there would have never been a revolution." Governor Thomas Johnson was born on November 14, 1732. He played a large part in the history of early American events. He represented Maryland in the First and Second Continental Congress and gave the nomination speech for George Washington during the Second Continental Congress. In 1776, Thomas Johnson served as Brigadier General in the Maryland Militia. Thomas Johnson was the first elected governor to the state of Maryland in 1777 and served 3 one-year terms. In 1785, he was a board member of the Potomac River Project, which was headed by George Washington. It was a precursor to what would become the C&O Canal. George Washington appointed Governor Johnson to the Supreme Court in 1792, and due to his failing health, he only served for 2 years. George Washington offered to nominate Thomas Johnson in 1795 for the position of Secretary of State, but due to his health, Johnson declined. Johnson delivered the eulogy for George Washington on February 22, 1800. Thomas Johnson was a lawyer, a landowner, a gentleman farmer, and a slaveholder. The 1790s census shows that the Johnson brothers owned 5% of the 3,642 enslaved people in Frederick County. That number is 182 people. In 1774, the 4 Johnson brothers, Thomas, Baker, Roger, and James, established the Catoctin Iron Furnace. In 1787, Thomas Johnson acquired Tuscarora and Etna Glass Works, with Etna being the most successful of the two. Governor Johnson is part of the Rose Hill Manor's history because of his purchase in 1778 of Rose Garden from Hans Peter Hoffman's son. Johnson farmed the land for 10 years. You may have read about the Hoffman family if you have visited the log cabin prior to your tour. If you have not visited, please pay a visit to the site after your tour of the manor house. Anne Jennings and Thomas Johnson married in 1766. They had 8 children. His oldest daughter, Anne Jennings Johnson, married John Colin Graham in 1788 and received the deed for Rose Garden from her father, renaming the property Rose Hill. In 1794, Johnson's wife died. A year later, he retired to Rose Hill Farm to live with Anne and her family. Governor Thomas Johnson died just before his 87th birthday at Rose Hill Manor on October 26, 1819. On the wall, right of the display box, is the christening gown worn by Thomas Johnson's oldest child and son, Thomas Jennings Johnson. Left of the display box is the marriage license of Thomas Jennings Johnson to his second wife, Elizabeth Russell. Below is the Book of Prayer, Thomas's wedding gift to Elizabeth Russell. In the display case, we have a large portrait on the left side, which is of Frances McPherson Dennis, a relative of Anne Johnson Graham's family. To the right is a miniature portrait of Charlotte Hesselus, the first wife of Thomas Jennings Johnson, Thomas Johnson's son, who died in childbirth in 1794. Below to the left is the mourning ring owned by Thomas's brother Baker Johnson in memory of their mother Dorcas. It's an engraving in ivory of an angel next to an urn or vessel and is surrounded by rubies. The Common Book of Prayer belonged to Thomas Johnson, with a signature and note inside on the cover. John and Anne Graham would have found sanctuary in their master bedchamber while living in a busy household, especially during the trying events of the early 1800s to the 1830s. Like his father-in-law, John Graham was a lawyer, and was also in business with his father as a merchant. He was an associate judge in the 5th District Court and served in the Senate, Western Shore District, in 1796 to 1801. John played a significant role in the Baltimore and Fredericktown Turnpike Company, which built the first part of what would become the National Road, also known as Route 40. While Rose Hill had been a flourishing farm, John's investments were not. After the War of 1812, the U.S. experienced its first national economic depression affecting his investments. In 1818, John Graham became the first president of the Frederick County National Bank. John and Anne outlived both of their children. Their daughter Anne Rebecca died in 1816, just before she would have turned 18 years old. Thomas Johnson Graham, their son, died in 1827. 34 enslaved people were owned by John Graham in 1820. One of those men served as John Graham's personal valet. His name was Jim Chase. Jim's position in the household gave him access to knowledge about John Graham and his daily business. Today, brave people like Jim Chase are called freedom seekers. In 1833, Jim led 3 younger enslaved men northbound, most likely towards Pennsylvania. An advertisement ran by John Graham in Frederick on July 7th stated, "Absconded on Saturday night, the 30th of June, the following named Negro slaves, the property of the subscriber: Jim Chase, John, Charles, and Edward. I will give the sum of $200, or $50 for each and every one that may be so secured or delivered." The men were never returned. Jim referred to himself as a pastor of the African Bethel Church in Frederick and was known for wearing black, such as this black wool suit on display. Attending church on Sundays was the one freedom granted by the slaveholders. Yellow fever epidemic came to Frederick during 1794, and Anne lost her mother, Anne Jennings Johnson, that year. This experience was followed by the cholera epidemic in the 1830s. During 1832 through 1835, Frederick suffered a scarlet fever epidemic, during which Anne Graham lost her husband, John, on March 20th, 1833, as well as several nephews in the following weeks. Anne Johnson Graham died 2 years later. Disease would have affected those held in enslavement as well as the enslavers. There are no documents that state the loss of those in service to their owners. Both the white women and the African enslaved would have knowledge to prepare medicines and remedies for the family of the manor house by using herbs and other plants from the garden. As medicines began to be manufactured, they were placed in bottles like these in the display case that were found during archaeology projects on the property of Rose Hill. David O. Thomas, a farmer and landowner, purchased the Rose Hill property in 1853 and lived here with his family. Frederick was a crossroads for travel during the American Civil War. There are documents stating that David Thomas granted permission for the Union troops to camp on Rose Hill property in 1862 and 63. Due to the location of the property, the manor house remained unharmed during the Civil War. Education was growing in the U.S. and shown to be important to the Thomas family. The daughters of David O. Thomas may have been sent to the Frederick Female Seminary, where David Thomas's niece, Margaret Scholl Hood, was enrolled. Margaret married and later helped establish Frederick's well-known Hood College. Thomas's sister Margaret married Sieber Arts and used her inheritance to create a fund to establish the Frederick County Library. Education was non-existent for most enslaved children and adults. Educating an enslaved individual was highly discouraged, and if caught by the enslaver, there could be serious consequences. Yet, the domestic servants, such as Miranda, Ellie, and Annie, who were listed in the records of Rose Hill, were responsible for the care and well-being of the Thomas children. Toys throughout history were both fun and functional. During the mid-1800s, the Thomas children would have played with toys that reflected what society valued. Boys would be expected to play with rocking horses and toy farm animals, while girls were expected to play with dolls and set the table for tea, all activities that mimic adult life. The white and black trimmed dollhouse is a replica of one played with by Anne Johnson Graham. The original is at the Maryland Historical Society in Baltimore. The painted dollhouse was created by Frederick County resident Colleen Ramsburg, a local artist. She painted the dollhouse, and miniatures of her original paintings are featured to decorate the walls throughout the house. Noah Kramer purchased the Rose Hill property in the early 1900s, and in 1915 he leased the house to Agnes Rice, who established a tea room and inn. The side of the room near the hall is set up as if it were a room in the inn. Women entrepreneurs grew as a result of increased education, political participation, and the independence women experienced during World War I, especially widows. Agnes was an example of one of those business owners. It wasn't a surprise that the women's suffrage movement was born. 36 states voted for ratification, or approval, of the 19th Amendment, which allows women to vote in national and local elections. Maryland didn't formally ratify the 19th Amendment until 1941. Within the suffrage movement, African American women faced discrimination, but they persevered and established their own suffrage organizations. The crazy quilt was made in Frederick County and is an example of a popular style of quilting. Various stitches of embroidery and needlework were used to create the unique squares. This piece is in good condition for its age. Due to the invention of the automobile and federal funding to improve national roads, travel became accessible and led to the success of places like the tea room and inn. Postcards were being printed and made for great advertising. The black dress in the case was a style that Ida B. Wells would have worn in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Miss Wells was an American investigative journalist, educator, and early leader of the civil rights movement. She was one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, better known as the NAACP. The Woodstock typewriter is from 1907. The first workable typewriter was built in 1808. The QWERTY keyboard was introduced in 1870, and today it is called the Universal Keyboard. The small item in the display case is a photo engraving of Rose Hill used by the Frederick News Post in 1910. On the left side of the display case, you will find a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin, an anti-slavery novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe and published in 1852. It is among the various newspaper articles and documents, including a certificate of freedom for Anne Robinson by her enslaver Michael Thomas, David Thomas's father, in 1856. A free person must carry the certificate with them at all times for fear of being arrested and sold back into slavery. References to the Maryland state laws are also on display dating to the early to mid-1800s. That severely limited the type of freedom African Americans could experience. One of the strictest laws was created in 1839. If a freed African American could not prove that they held good and industrious habits, they were sold into slavery. With increased manumissions, the outcome was that plantations employed free black people alongside the enslaved laborers. In 1860, a law was passed banning manumissions after June 1, 1860, due to the growing number of freed enslaved people. Maryland abolished slavery in 1864. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution officially abolished slavery in the United States on December 18th of 1865. This concludes the video tour of the second floor of Rose Hill Manor.